Under the dim lights of the alien war camp, the human soldier sat chained to a post, his uniform torn, his face bruised, but his eyes alive with fire. Around him, a circle of alien soldiers jeered and laughed, their voices echoing across the metal walls of the compound. They had dragged him from the battlefield days ago, parading his capture like a trophy, to break the morale of their enemies and to amuse themselves. For the aliens, this was entertainment. They considered humans to be nothing more than stubborn animals, clever enough to fight, but destined to lose. The alien commander, a towering figure with scaled skin and cruel eyes, stepped forward and raised his hand for silence. His voice was deep, mocking as he addressed his troops. "Behold, the great human warrior. This is the enemy you fear, a fragile creature with soft skin and bones so easily broken. He is proof that humans are nothing before us." The crowd roared with laughter. Some threw scraps of food at the prisoner. Others kicked dirt at his boots. The commander leaned down close to the soldier, his breath reeking of victory, and whispered, "Your people are weak, and your defiance means nothing. The galaxy will watch you crawl before us." The human said nothing. His lips were cracked. From thirst, his muscles ached from the restraints, but his silence was deliberate. He did not give them the pleasure of reaction. Instead, his gaze stayed locked on the commander, unblinking, unwavering. It was a look that unsettled a few of the younger soldiers, though they would never admit it. They expected begging or rage, but what they saw was endurance, cold and steady. Hours stretched into days. The aliens took turns mocking him, forcing him to stand until his knees gave way, drenching him with icy water, laughing when he shivered. They wanted him broken. They told jokes in their own language, pointing at him as if he were a creature from a zoo. The commander would often return to the circle to deliver long speeches about human weakness, how their worlds would fall, how their fleets were scattered. But even as his words carried across the camp, the human soldier studied every detail. He watched the guards' rotations. He counted the steps between the posts. He memorized the rhythm of their patrols. Every insult was fuel, every humiliation. Another spark to feed the fire growing in his chest. One night under the glow of alien floodlights, they forced him to his feet again and ordered him to mimic their salute. The crowd of aliens howled with laughter as he struggled to lift his chained arms. They wanted him to mock himself, to admit defeat. Instead, he lifted his head and stood straight as much as the chains allowed. His eyes swept across the crowd, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice, though cracked, was steady. "You think I am broken, but you mistake silence for surrender. You do not understand what it means to be human." The camp fell quiet for a heartbeat. The aliens stared as if they had seen an animal speak. The commander snarled and struck him across the face, but the words had already landed. The silence of the human had turned into a weapon, and it unsettled the crowd. Laughter resumed, but it was thinner, weaker than before. Some of the guards glanced at each other, uneasy. Later, as the soldier sat once again in the dirt, his chains heavy on his wrists, he closed his eyes and let the sounds of the camp wash over him. He heard the footsteps of the guards, the grinding of machinery, the clatter of alien weapons being checked and rechecked. He was hurt, yes, but not broken. He knew pain and he knew fear, but he also knew resolve. His body might be chained, but his mind was free and planning. He thought of his people, of his comrades who still fought somewhere. Out in the stars, he thought of home and the promise he had made never to yield. As the night deepened, the alien soldiers returned to their barracks, leaving only a few guards on watch. The human soldier opened his eyes, and in that silence, he smiled, not with joy but with determination. The aliens had mocked him. They had paraded his capture as a victory. But he knew their arrogance was the weakness he needed, and so beneath the alien sky, while chains bound his body, the human soldier's spirit, sharpened like steel. He would endure every insult, every strike, every cruel laugh, because he understood something. The aliens never would. The mocking was not his defeat. It was the beginning of theirs. The next day, the camp was alive with noise as the aliens prepared for another round of entertainment. The human soldier was dragged from his post and shoved into the center of the compound, where hundreds of alien troops had gathered to witness the humiliation. The commander raised his arm high and declared to the crowd that today they would show the galaxy how fragile the humans truly were. They tied the soldier to a tall iron pole, his arms stretched wide, and the soldiers began hurling insults while others tossed small stones at his chest. The laughter was loud, cruel, and meant to break him, but the soldier stood as steady as he could, his breathing shallow but controlled. His silence was beginning to unnerve the ones closest to him, though they masked it with louder jeers, and the crowd pressed in. The aliens escalated their game. They forced him to his knees and commanded him to beg for water. They held cups of the precious liquid before his cracked lips, only to pour it into the dirt, while they watched him stare without flinching. They thought the thirst would drive him mad, but instead it only hardened the steel in his eyes. The commander ordered another trial. They placed a heavy pack of alien metal on his back and forced him to crawl across the yard as the soldiers cheered. Every stumble brought more laughter, but each time the soldier fell, he pushed himself back up. His body trembled. His skin tore against the metal ground, but he refused to collapse completely. Every motion was proof that he still owned his will. A few of the younger aliens began to whisper among themselves. One guard murmured that no prisoner had lasted so long without breaking. Another spat at the human, insisting he was only prolonging the inevitable. But the tone in their voices was different now. The laughter no longer carried the same sharp edge of superiority. Some soldiers began to fall quiet, watching with an unease they could not name. They mocked him out of habit, but the human's refusal to surrender was a shadow that stretched across the camp. That night they locked him back into his chains, but instead of leaving him in silence, they kept 2 guards nearby who were ordered to taunt him without rest. They insulted his species. They described how human worlds would burn and how his people would be enslaved. The soldier listened to every word, not because he believed them, but because each sentence revealed more about their arrogance, their blind confidence in victory. He let their words wash over him, until they grew frustrated at his lack of response. One guard finally kicked him hard in the ribs, demanding he speak. The soldier lifted his head slowly and replied in a low, steady voice, "You have no idea what a human can survive." That single sentence froze the guards for a heartbeat before they barked nervous laughter. Days passed and the mockery grew crueler. They forced him to carry alien equipment during drills. They paraded him through the camp, tied to a pole while troops spat and shouted insults. Yet everywhere he went, he kept that same unyielding gaze, never broken, never lowered. It began to spread unease beyond the guards. Prisoners from other species hidden in nearby cages began to watch him too. They whispered of the human who endured, without fear. Some even began to believe that if one human could stand against so much, perhaps their hope was not completely lost. The commander noticed the shifting atmosphere, and it angered him. He ordered a demonstration to crush the prisoners. Spirit once and for all. They dragged the soldier into the main square under the glare of the floodlights and brought forth a device meant for interrogation. It emitted sharp bursts of pain that made even the strongest alien collapse in moments. The commander smiled cruelly as he placed the device against the soldier's arm. Electricity crackled through his body. His muscles spasmed, and yet through clenched teeth he endured. The crowd shouted for more, and the commander increased the power. Still the human refused to scream. He gritted his teeth and looked the commander straight in the eye, even as his body shook. Minutes felt like hours. The device burned against his skin, but the soldier's resolve held until finally the commander withdrew, frustrated at the lack of satisfaction. He had expected pleas for mercy. He had expected tears. Instead, all he saw was quiet defiance. The silence of the human became louder than the noise of the crowd that night as the soldier lay chained. Once again, his body battered and trembling, he thought of what had just occurred. He knew the commander would not stop. He knew the games would only grow more vicious, but he also knew something vital. He had begun to shift the balance. Their laughter had weakened their certainty. Cracked, he saw it in their eyes, the unease, the frustration, the creeping fear. He closed his eyes and let the pain settle into his bones. He would endure it, as he had endured everything else. He was not waiting for rescue. He was not praying for mercy. He was preparing each day of mockery. Each cruel test, each insult, was teaching him more about his enemy. And when the moment came when arrogance blinded them to his opportunity, He would show them that mocking a human soldier was the last mistake they would ever make. The air inside the alien camp grew heavier with each passing day, and though the routines of the guards continued, there was a subtle shift in the way they looked at the human soldier. They still hurled insults when ordered, they still threw scraps into the dirt at his feet and laughed when he refused to bend. But their eyes betrayed something different now. There was hesitation in there, cruelty, as if they were unsure whether the mockery was meant to belittle him or protect themselves from what he represented. The commander, however, was determined to crush the strange aura growing around the human prisoner. He declared that the spectacle would continue until the soldier begged or died. The human soldier listened carefully to every sound in the camp. He counted the number of guards who marched near his cage at night. He studied the patterns of the alien machinery, the hum of the power generators, the timing of the searchlights that swept across the grounds. Though his body was weakened, his mind grew sharper, and with each cruel taunt, he grew more resolved to turn their arrogance into a weapon. He knew they underestimated him, and he knew that arrogance would open a door. One morning, the aliens gathered all the prisoners into the main square. The commander ordered the human soldier dragged into the center and forced to his knees. In front of everyone, the commander proclaimed that the human was no more than a symbol of weakness and that his example would break the spirit of every captive. The guards shoved him down and demanded that he admit the superiority of the alien empire. The crowd of soldiers laughed, waiting for him to plead or falter. Instead, he lifted his head. His eyes locked on the commander, and he whispered with steady conviction, "You are afraid." That single phrase cut through the laughter like a blade. The aliens froze for a moment before erupting into louder jeers to drown out the discomfort. But the seed had been planted. The other prisoners, especially those of smaller, weaker species, looked at him differently from that moment. Their shoulders straightened and whispers spread among them of the human who did not bend. A reptilian prisoner chained nearby muttered that no one had ever spoken to the commander in such a way and survived. The aliens heard the whispers too, and their frustration grew. The commander could feel control slipping from him, though he would never admit it. Later that night, as the soldier sat in his cage, two guards approached, one younger and one older. They carried food and water, but only enough for one. The older guard sneered and demanded that the human crawl for it. The soldier remained seated silent, his gaze calm. The younger guard shifted uneasily. He muttered that perhaps they should not push so far, that the human's defiance was unnatural. The older snapped at him, calling him a coward. The exchange did not escape the soldier's notice. He had seen it before, cracks in the armor of an arrogant enemy. The next day, the commander staged another show. He ordered the human strapped to a machine that simulated crushing gravity, forcing him to his knees as though the weight of a planet pressed down on his back. The crowd cheered, expecting to see bones snap and spirit break. But though the soldier trembled, though sweat poured from his brow and his vision blurred, he refused to collapse. He clawed at the ground and forced himself upright again and again. Each time he rose, the alien's laughter grew thinner, until many stood silent, staring in disbelief. When the machine finally shut down, the human collapsed to the dirt, his chest heaving, yet his eyes still defiant. The silence that followed was more powerful than any words. That night, while he recovered from the brutal trial, the soldier began to plan in earnest. He had seen which guards faltered in their duties, who avoided his gaze, who tightened their grip on their weapons when they walked near his cage. He noted the flaws in their discipline and the arrogance in their procedures. He knew the time was not yet right, but he felt it approaching like a storm building. On the horizon, his body bore the marks of pain, but his spirit was sharpening with every test as the stars glittered beyond the electrified barriers of the camp. The soldier whispered quietly to himself, reminding his heart of the oath he had carried. Into battle, humanity does not yield, humanity does not bow. He thought of his comrades scattered among the stars and of his family far away, waiting without knowing his fate. He imagined their faces not as comfort but as fuel. His survival was no longer only for himself. It was for every prisoner who looked to him for hope. It was for every human who refused to be mocked into silence. The commander still believed he was in control, but within the shadows of the camp, The balance had begun to shift. The soldiers laughed less, the prisoners whispered more, and the human soldier sat in his cage not as a victim, but as the spark of something the aliens could not yet comprehend. He was waiting, and when the moment came, he would transform their mockery into their downfall. The commander of the alien camp grew restless as the human prisoner refused to break. No matter the punishments, no matter the humiliation, the soldier endured with a stubbornness that unsettled even the hardest veterans. The commander saw the whispers among the guards and the shifting glances of the prisoners, and he knew that something had to be done to crush this spark of defiance before it became wildfire. He decided that the next trial would be harsher than anything before, a test not of body alone but of spirit and dignity. At dawn, the human soldier was dragged into the largest courtyard, his chains rattling as soldiers gathered from across the compound. The commander announced that today the human would serve as entertainment for the entire garrison. He ordered a gauntlet formed with 2 lines of armed guards stretching from one end of the yard to the other. The prisoner would be forced to walk through while each soldier struck him with rods and blades. The crowd roared its approval, confident that no creature could withstand such cruelty. The human soldier stood at the entrance of the gauntlet, bruised, exhausted, but with that same unyielding stare. The commander sneered and gave the signal. The first blows came hard, striking across his arms and chest. Each step forward brought fresh pain, but he refused to fall. He staggered. His body screamed for rest, yet he forced one foot in front of the other. The aliens shouted louder, trying to drown out the growing unease in their ranks. Some of them struck harder than necessary, but their eyes betrayed confusion. How could this fragile being still move after so much punishment? By the time he reached the end, his body was bleeding. His vision swam with darkness, but he remained on his feet. He turned his head slowly and looked back down the line of soldiers who had beaten him. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, yet he smiled faintly and lifted his chin. That small gesture was enough to ignite murmurs among the prisoners watching from their cages. To them it was not weakness they saw, but a symbol that even in the face of impossible odds a human could endure. The commander, furious at the display, ordered the guards to throw him into isolation, a dark cell with no light, no food, and no sound, meant to break even the strongest minds. For 3 days they left him there, chained to the floor, his only company the throb of his own heartbeat and the ache in his bones. But when the door finally opened and light spilled into the darkness, the guards found him still sitting upright, his eyes gleaming with the same fire. He had not begged. He had not screamed. He had not surrendered. The commander realized brute force alone would not break this man. He tried a different tactic. He brought other prisoners before the human and threatened to kill them if the soldier did not kneel. The commander believed that empathy would crack his spirit, but he had underestimated the depth of human resolve. The soldier spoke with a voice rough from thirst but filled with certainty. "Kill me if you wish, but you will not see me bow." The other prisoners looked at him with wide eyes, some filled with tears, but also, with a spark of courage, they began to whisper his words to one another, passing them like secret fire through the cages. That night the guards whispered too. Some wondered aloud if keeping the human alive was a mistake. Others argued he was already broken, but their voices lacked conviction. The soldier listened from his chains, his mind sharp. Despite the pain, he saw the cracks widening in their confidence, and he knew the moment to act was drawing closer. He began testing the limits of his restraints, pushing against the chains at different hours to see which guards watched closely and which grew careless. He studied the way the locks clicked, the way the guards changed shifts, and the way the commander's pride blinded him to danger. He was patient, for he knew patience was a weapon as sharp as any blade. Days later, the commander arranged one final show to prove to his troops that humans were powerless. He ordered the human brought into the square once again and declared that he would be broken in front of all to erase any trace of defiance. The crowd gathered, restless, hungry for dominance. The commander struck him himself with a heavy staff, demanding he kneel. Still the human stood, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. The commander struck again, harder this time. The soldier staggered, yet caught himself and whispered just loud enough for all to hear. "You will learn that a human never bows." The silence that followed was different from any before. The guards looked at each other. Unsettled, the prisoners clung to the bars of their cages, whispering his words. The commander snarled in rage, but deep in the shadows of the compound, the balance of fear had shifted. The human soldier was no longer a prisoner to be mocked. He had become a symbol of defiance, and his endurance had planted fear in the very hearts of those who once laughed the loudest. And as he was dragged back to his cell that night, he knew with certainty that the moment of action was near. He was not only surviving anymore, he was preparing. The night air in the alien camp was thick with tension, and though the guards pretended nothing had changed, their eyes betrayed unease. The human soldier had endured every cruelty, every attempt to break him, and still he stood. His silence had turned to words, his words had turned to symbols, and now those symbols had begun to spread among both the prisoners and the guards. The commander could sense the shift, but his arrogance convinced him that one final display of power would crush the ember before it grew into fire. What he did not realize was that the ember had already become a flame. The soldier waited in his cell, his body scarred, his muscles aching, yet his mind sharp. He had been studying the guards for weeks, noting the ones who grew careless during the late hours of the night and the ones who muttered complaints about their command. He had memorized the rhythm of the camp, the changing of shifts, the timing of the searchlights, the weak points in the outer fences. He had no weapons, but he carried something more dangerous than blades or guns. He carried resolve, and he carried patience. One evening, the opportunity arrived. The guards who dragged him from his cell were careless, distracted by arguments over orders. They locked his chains loosely, thinking his exhaustion would keep him docile. When they shoved him back against the post in the square, one chain did not click fully. He felt the looseness against his wrist, and he knew this was the moment he had waited. For he did not move, then he endured the usual mockery, the taunts, the commander's endless speech about the weakness of mankind. All the while he tested the chain slowly, carefully, until he felt it shift against the lock. The aliens laughed as always, but it was a hollow sound, no longer filled with certainty. The prisoners leaned forward from their cages, whispering the words they had learned from the human: "Never bow, never break." The commander shouted louder, trying to drown them out. The soldier waited his moment, calm even as his body screamed with exhaustion. When the commander struck him with his staff and the crowd erupted in cheers, the human soldier pulled sharply against the loose chain. The lock snapped with a sharp crack, swallowed by the noise of the crowd. For the first time since his capture, one arm was free. His eyes flickered with fire as he kept the arm low, hidden by the shadows. He endured another blow from the staff. Then, in one swift motion, he seized the weapon, twisting it from the commander's hands. The crowd gasped, the laughter turning instantly into stunned silence. The soldier swung the staff in a wide arc, striking the nearest guard and sending him crashing to the ground. He tore free the second chain with brute force fueled by weeks of rage and resolve. The prisoners erupted in shouts of triumph, their voices echoing across the compound. The guards rushed forward, weapons raised, but the human moved with precision, every strike fueled by the memory of humiliation and the will to live. He was not reckless, he was focused. Each motion was calculated. Each attack meant to disable rather than waste time. The commander roared in fury, calling for reinforcements, but panic spread among the soldiers. Some hesitated to approach, others fumbled with their weapons. Fear had taken root in their hearts. The human soldier pressed his advantage, striking down guard after guard, until he stood alone in the square, surrounded by stunned silence. His chest heaved. His body was battered, yet he held the staff high like a banner of defiance. The prisoners screamed for freedom, their voices a tidal wave of hope. The human looked around at them, his eyes burning with determination. He slammed the staff against the ground and shouted words that carried across the camp: "Rise now." The moment had come to turn defiance into action. The prisoners roared in answer. The guards faltered, their discipline crumbling under the weight of fear. With the staff in hand and the chains broken, The soldier moved swiftly toward the cages, striking locks, smashing barriers until doors burst open. One by one, prisoners poured into the square, their numbers swelling, their voices united. The guards tried to contain them, but the tide had turned. The arrogance that once defined the aliens became their downfall. They had mocked him too long, underestimated his spirit too deeply. Now they faced not a broken man but a leader forged from pain and humiliation. The commander retreated, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. He shouted for his troops to crush the uprising, but few obeyed. Many had lost the will to fight against the man they once mocked. The human soldier advanced through the chaos, his every step a declaration that humanity could not be broken. He fought not only for himself but for every prisoner who had suffered under alien cruelty. He had become the symbol of resistance, the spark that turned despair into rebellion. That night, the alien camp no longer rang with laughter. It rang with the clash of weapons, the cries of the freed, and the thunder of a human heart unyielding. The soldier knew the battle had only begun, but he also knew the aliens had already lost something they could never reclaim. Their illusion of superiority had been shattered, and in the heart of the storm the human stood tall, battered, bloodied, but victorious over his chains. The mocking had ended. The reckoning had begun. The uprising had begun like a spark, and now it roared through the alien camp like wildfire. The human soldier moved at the center of the chaos, his broken chains hanging from his wrists, and the alien staff clutched in his hands. The prisoners surged around him, no longer afraid, their voices rising in a storm of anger and hope. The guards scrambled to contain the rebellion, but their lines fractured under the weight of their own fear. For weeks they had mocked the human, now they faced him unleashed, and the sight alone drained their courage. The human directed the freed captives with sharp gestures, urging them toward the armory and supply crates. He knew that weapons were the key to turning chaos into victory. The prisoners responded eagerly, their desperation transformed into fierce determination. A group of reptilian warriors tore open a crate of captured rifles, while insectoid prisoners used their clawed limbs to rip down the barriers that kept them caged. Each strike of freedom echoed across the camp, building momentum. The commander roared from a raised platform, his voice desperate as he ordered his soldiers to fight to the last. He shouted that they must prove the superiority of their empire, but his words no longer carried the same weight. His troops hesitated, some firing into the crowd, others retreating in confusion. The commander's arrogance had been a shield, but it was crumbling in the face of rebellion. The human soldier saw the fear behind the commander's eyes, and he knew that the balance of power had shifted forever. The guards tried to regroup, forming lines at the gates to contain the revolt, but the human led a charge straight through them. He swung the staff with brutal precision, breaking weapons and scattering enemies. Prisoners armed with stolen rifles followed, close behind, unleashing volleys of fire that tore into the alien ranks. The once orderly camp dissolved into chaos. Smoke rose from burning supplies, alarms screamed through the night, and the guards who had laughed the loudest were now running for their lives. Yet the soldier knew that raw rage was not enough. He called out to the prisoners, rallying them with simple words that cut through the noise. Hold together, stay strong, fight as one. His voice carried authority born not from rank, but from endurance and sacrifice. The prisoners listened, moving as a unit rather than a mob. They followed his lead, securing corners of the camp, cutting down searchlights and overwhelming isolated squads of guards. Every moment of his suffering, every humiliation, had prepared him for this command. He had studied their weaknesses, and now he turned each one into a weapon. The commander, desperate to reclaim control, unleashed a squad of elite enforcers, towering brutes clad in heavy armor, armed with electrified blades. They stormed into the square, cutting through the chaos with ruthless efficiency. The crowd faltered, fear returning as the enforcers advanced. The commander sneered, believing the tide was about to turn, but the human soldier stepped forward to meet them. He gripped the staff tightly and raised his voice for all to hear. They believe fear will break us. Show them what it means to be free. The enforcers charged, and the human met them head-on. The first clash sent shockwaves through the square. His staff cracked against armored plating, sparks flying as he deflected a blade aimed for his chest. He moved with precision fueled by pain and rage, striking joints and weak points. He ducked beneath a sweeping strike and countered with a blow to the neck that dropped one enforcer to the ground. The prisoners, seeing his defiance, rallied around him, hurling stones, firing stolen rifles, and swarming the elite squad. With their leader holding the front, they found courage in their own strength. One by one, the enforcers fell until the last was dragged down beneath a tide of furious captives. The square erupted in triumphant roars. The commander's face twisted with disbelief as he watched his most feared warriors destroyed by the very prisoners he had once mocked. The human soldier raised his staff high, his body shaking from exhaustion, but his eyes blazing with fire. The prisoners chanted his words, "Never bow, never break," echoing them across the burning camp. The guards, who remained, began to abandon their posts, fleeing into the night. Some dropped their weapons as they ran, unwilling to risk facing the fury of the uprising. The camp, once a place of cruel laughter and mockery, was now drenched in smoke and defiance. The human soldier wasted no time. He organized the freed captives into groups, ordering them to secure food, weapons, and transport. He knew they could not linger. Reinforcements would come, and the fight had only just begun. As dawn began to break, the human stood on the same platform where the commander had once mocked him. He looked out over the prisoners, now free and armed, their eyes fixed on him with reverence. He did not raise his voice. In grand speeches, he spoke with steady, calm words. "We are not slaves, we are not broken. Tonight you saw the truth of what it means to be human. We endure and we rise, and so will all of you." The crowd answered with a thunder of voices united across species. The alien empire had sought to use his suffering as a spectacle, but instead, it had forged a rebellion that could not be contained. The commander fled into the shadows, his pride shattered, and his forces scattered. The human soldier knew he would face him again, but not here. Not tonight. Tonight was victory. Tonight was proof that their laughter had backfired, and that a single human could ignite the fire of freedom. The camp smoldered in ruins, and the galaxy would soon learn of what had happened here. For now the soldier stood battered, scarred, and unbroken, a symbol of defiance that no chain could silence. The ruins of the alien camp smoldered under the pale light of dawn. Smoke rose into the sky, carrying with it the cries of victory from those who had once been prisoners. The human soldier stood among them, his body covered in wounds, but his spirit stronger than ever. Around him, dozens of freed captives of every shape and species now looked to him not just as a survivor, but as their leader. The laughter of the aliens was gone, replaced by silence broken only by the shuffle of boots as the last of the guards fled into the wilderness. Their arrogance had been crushed, and their mocking turned to terror. The soldier knew the battle was not finished. The camp might have fallen, but the alien empire stretched far beyond these walls. Reinforcements would come, and they would not underestimate him again. He gathered the prisoners in the square, speaking in a voice that carried across the ruins. "You have all suffered here. They mocked you, they broke your bodies, they tried to break your spirits, but you are standing now and you are free. We cannot stay. We must take this fire we have lit and carry it to others. We will turn their arrogance into their defeat." His words struck deep. Every prisoner knew the truth of it. They could not linger waiting for death to descend. They scavenged the camp, gathering weapons, food, and tools the reptilian warriors carried, crates of rifles on their scaled shoulders. The insectoid species with razor-sharp limbs carved through remaining locks, freeing even the weakest prisoners who had been hidden in the darkest cells. The air hummed with new purpose. The human soldier directed them with steady precision, organizing squads to guard the perimeter, while others prepared stolen transports for escape. As preparations continued, the commander returned. He had fled during the chaos, but pride would not allow him to vanish. Without a fight, he arrived with a small force of loyal guards, armored and armed with heavy weapons. His voice thundered with fury as he stepped into the square. "You dare defy the Empire. You dare let this human turn you against us. The Empire will crush you all, and I will make this human crawl before me before he dies." The crowd tensed, weapons raised, but the soldier lifted a hand, steady and calm. He stepped forward, his body battered, his clothes torn, yet his presence filled the yard like a storm. The two enemies faced each other, the commander towering with rage, the human steady with resolve. The commander lunged with a blade drawn, his strength fueled by hatred. The human met him head-on, their weapons clashing with sparks and steel. The fight was brutal, the commander's strength immense, but the soldier fought with something deeper. Every strike carried the weight of his suffering, every block fueled by the memory of mockery, every counterattack sharpened by the fire of defiance. The battle raged across the square, the freed prisoners forming a ring around them, their chants echoing, "Never bow, never break." The commander struck hard, driving the human back, but each time the soldier rose again, battered but unbroken. With a final surge, he twisted the commander's blade aside and drove his staff into the alien's chest. The impact echoed like thunder. The commander staggered, blood spilling from his mouth, disbelief in his eyes. He tried to speak, but no words came. Only silence, as he collapsed to the ground. For a long moment the square was still. Then the prisoners erupted in cheers, their voices shaking the walls of the ruined camp. The human soldier stood over the fallen commander chest, heaving eyes, blazing. He had endured every insult, every cruelty, and in the end he had turned their arrogance against them. He raised the staff high above his head, not in triumph but in declaration. "We are free, their laughter is ended. Let the galaxy hear our answer." The crowd roared. In answer, their voices a tide of defiance that seemed to shake the very ground. They had not only escaped, they had struck a blow that would echo far beyond the borders of this camp. Word would spread across the stars of the human soldier mocked, humiliated and tortured, who rose and led captives to freedom. The Empire's reputation would never be the same. With the commander dead and the camp in ruins, the soldier turned his focus to the future. He knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would come for them, but now they were ready. They were not just survivors, they were fighters forged in suffering, united by defiance. He looked at the faces of those around him, and he saw more than fear. He saw hope. He saw courage. He saw the fire of resistance. Together they boarded stolen transports, the engines roaring to life as the first rays of sunlight spread across the horizon. The soldier took his place at the front, his gaze fixed on the stars. Beyond lay danger, beyond lay war, but beyond also lay freedom. He had not fought only for himself. He had fought for every prisoner, for every world under the shadow of the Empire. His voice, steady and low, carried to those around him. "Remember this day. They mocked us and we endured. They struck us and we rose. They tried to break us and we became unbreakable." The transports lifted into the sky, leaving the wreckage behind. As they ascended, the freed prisoners looked out over the burning camp and knew they were no longer victims. They were part of something larger, a spark that would spread through the galaxy. The human soldier sat in silence, his eyes on the stars, his body exhausted but his spirit unshaken. He had shown them what it meant to be human, not with words of pride, but with unyielding will. The Empire had thought him a spectacle, a joke to amuse their soldiers. Instead, he had become their nightmare, a reminder that humanity was not to be mocked or broken. The laughter of the aliens had backfired horribly, and in its place stood a legend. The galaxy would remember the day a single human prisoner rose from the chains and led countless others into freedom. The story of that camp would travel faster than any fleet. It would be told in whispers by prisoners in the dark and shouted by rebels in the streets. It would be carried across stars as proof that arrogance could not defeat resilience, and that one human's defiance could change the fate of many. And as the transports vanished into the void, leaving behind only fire and silence, the soldier closed his eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. He had endured, he had risen, he had won. The transports streaked across the dark sky, carrying with them the freed captives and the human soldier who had once been mocked as nothing more than a weak plaything of the Empire. The camp that had been his prison now burned behind them, its walls collapsing, its towers broken, its laughter silenced forever. Inside the lead transport, the soldier sat at the front, his body wrapped in scars and exhaustion, but his gaze fixed firmly on the horizon. He had endured the humiliation, the pain, the endless attempts to break him, and he had turned every insult into fuel. The ones who had laughed were gone, their jeers replaced by silence and fear. The prisoners filled the ship with a restless energy. Their voices whispered of freedom, of vengeance, of hope that felt strange and unfamiliar after so much darkness. They looked to the human as if he were more than flesh and blood. They saw him as proof that defiance could not be crushed, that spirit could outlast chains. The soldier felt their eyes on him, and though he carried no desire for glory, he understood the weight of what he had done. He had become a symbol, and symbols could outlive the body. As the fleet of stolen transports broke through the clouds into the open void, the stars stretched endless before them. Each glittering light was a reminder of the worlds still enslaved, of the millions still bound under the arrogance of the empire. The soldier tightened his grip on the railing of the cockpit. He knew this was not the end of his fight. It was the beginning. What had started as mockery had become an uprising, and what was now an uprising would become a war. He could feel it in the silence of space like thunder before the storm. The reptilian warrior who had fought beside him leaned forward and asked softly, "What now, human?" The soldier turned his head, his face still shadowed by the dim glow of the instruments. His answer was steady, simple, and filled with fire. "Now we show them that their fear is justified. The galaxy will know what it means when humanity rises." The ships cut across the void, their engines blazing trails of light behind them. The Empire licked its wounds and prepared its retaliation. But no matter what force they gathered, no matter how many fleets they sent, they could never erase what had been born in that camp. The tale would spread from star to star of the human soldier who had endured the laughter of his captors only to rise and shatter their pride. His name might be lost in time, but his defiance would remain carved into the memory of every world. He closed his eyes only for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the stars and the silence settle inside him. He did not think of himself as a hero. He thought of the comrades he had lost, the people still waiting for freedom, the world still chained. He thought of the commander whose arrogance had crumbled beneath the weight of a single prisoner. He thought of the laughter that had once filled the camp and how hollow it sounded now in memory. He thought of the fire that had begun in his heart when the first insult struck him, and how that fire now burned across an entire rebellion. The transports pressed deeper into the night, and the human soldier opened his eyes once more. He would fight again, and again he would lead when needed, and he would endure when others faltered, because that was what it meant to be human. The Empire would learn that they had not broken him. They had forged him, and when their worlds burned with the light of resistance, they would remember the day they mocked a man who refused to bow. The end